how did I cope with them telling me that I probably would never, or that I would never walk again? You know, what kind of life are you going to lead as a paraplegic? And I thought I could probably do anything. Probably might take me a little longer. And then at times you worried, hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to school? Are you going to be a productive citizen? Are you going to marry anybody? How did I end up in Vietnam War is where I was drafted. You had a 2-year commitment. We didn't know, hey, are we going to end up in Vietnam, or will we be stateside, or, some of them were shipped to Germany. My father was a World War II vet, and a lot of our uncles were World War II vets. And we were raised in a small community. I mean, it just seems like a lot of the veterans, there was both the American Legion and the VFW post there. And I guess we didn't, I'm thinking, hey, you're going to commit a year, you had a 12-month duty in Vietnam, and you're going to be back home.
We were all told, if you're going to amount to anything, you should go to college. And I started college, and I was in there for 3 months. And I looked out the window one day, and the sun was shining in, and I thought, what in the world am I doing here? And I got up, and I went and volunteered for the draft. Because that was, if I wouldn't have, they would have just drafted me whenever my name come up, since I was not in school. We met the afternoon I got on a bus in Brookings, South Dakota, where I live now. 2 young kids riding on a bus for 50 minutes, an hour.
Yeah.
And then the next day, I went out partying that night, and then they couldn't get me up. I was too drunk. They couldn't get me up at 7 o'clock to get down to the induction station, so he knew who I was because I was missing.
Yeah, he was, you and, I can't think of that other kid's name.
From Arlington.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I got down there and they were chewing me out, and like I cared. I said, what are you going to do, send me to Vietnam? We got to Vietnam, we were at Cam Ranh Bay, and then we waited for 2 days for our orders to come down to see where we were going, and we both were on the same set of orders.
Our names came up on the border, and it said 4th ID up in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. We were trained though as mortarmen, so we're thinking we're going to be at a base camp fire support base. We're not going to be out in the jungle. So we go to Camp Inari right outside of Pleiku. We meet, there was probably 25 replacements. And of course this E7, the staff sergeant said, welcome to Vietnam, you're all infantry. And of course right away I raised my hand because I'm thinking, well, we don't know anything about infantry, Lyle and myself. And I said, staff sergeant, there's been a hell of a mistake. We don't know anything about this infantry, so we're 11 Charlie, we're mortarmen. And he said, don't worry, young fella. So I'm thinking, he's listening, The next words, you will learn real quick.
And I thought to myself, oh no, because I knew where I was going to be for the next year. And I thought, we are in a lot of trouble here. And so that's how we got to the jungle of Vietnam, and then we didn't come out of the jungle. I came out of the jungle. Out of 12 months, I spent 10 and a half months in the jungle.
But then after being there about a week and a half in the bush, Barney, my sergeant, said, you're going with Loveless on a 4-man LRP team. And I said, okay, I said, 4 men, what's a LRP team? He said, long range reconnaissance patrol. Well, I'm thinking too, 4 guys? I mean, you probably just go out in the morning and come back towards evening. So I said, you just go out for one day? And Barney said, no, Murph, you go out at least 4 days. I said, just with 4 guys? Well, he said, don't worry, Loveless will break you in. Yeah, and then right away I'm thinking, what'd we get into? Your butt's on the line. Yeah, you want to survive this. We used to call the USA the world. You want to go back to the world.
You didn't know what was going to happen. Any morning you got up and we had our work to do, whether the whole company was moving or a 4-man patrol was moving. You had no idea what that day was going to be. You had no idea if you were going to get into a battle or if you weren't. But you had a job to do, and if you lost focus on that job, there was a good chance you were going to be in trouble. Our gear that we were carrying was about 110 pounds. And so about 100 degrees. And we were in triple canopy. So you'd very seldom ever seen the sun. The sun was always out, but you were soaking wet all day long, every day, because if it wasn't raining and you were soaking wet from raining, you were soaking wet from sweating. There were centipedes, and there were spiders, and there were leeches, mosquitoes. The mosquitoes were so big that they would attack right through your poncho liners, and it was a terrible environment. When Eugene got hit, that was the nightmare that we hoped would never happen.
We were on a search and destroy mission, company element. Roughly, we were 100 guys, probably should have been 140. We were moving through this area, and to me, it was north of Khartoum, south of Dak To. It's jungle. And we had orders, hey, if we don't run into anything today, they're going to chop us out.
I was leading the company that day. My squad was on point. And I had to lead the company to the next night location, all geared up. But to go in a straight line meant we had to go up a very steep hill, which I knew we couldn't do. It was wet time of the year, and so it'd be muddy. I turned and went in the direction that I felt was the best, and we ran into steps cut into the hill. And I thought, this isn't good. And we really had no choice, so we took the steps and went up the hill. Well, come around this tree, and these guys took off.
My lieutenant said, Murph, we're going to take your squad and try to track this guy. And I said, well, let's move. But only half my squad showed up, and over half Robillard, this other sergeant's squad. And then he told me, he said, Murph, you don't have to go because you're getting short. And I said, no, you're taking half my men, I'll go with them. Well, we just took off, and I ended up walking point, and probably shouldn't have been. And we walked probably 400 meters, and we ran in. And the guy that actually shot me was I didn't see him at first. He was only about 20 feet from me, and he popped out of a spider hole, and he shot me, and then he shot my platoon sergeant. He shot me twice through the right side, and I thought he blew my legs off, because I was numb right away from the waist down. I thought I was actually going to die, and I seen the faces that I'd met in my lifetime. With just their faces, and they floated above me. My grandmother, this was April 20th, is I always call my alive day, that the good Lord let me live. But my grandmother had just died in March. Now, she was above me. And I even said to the Lord, Lord, I don't want to go yet, and I got things I want to do. And I guess I always think him and I made a pact that, hey, you're going to go back to the world, but you got to do some good things. You don't go back there and you don't, I guess you don't drink, you don't get on drugs, you be a productive citizen. And I always think that's why he let me live.
And the next thing I know, they call up and say, we've got 6 WI. I listened to the captain talk to a battalion, and he's got 6 WI8. I said, wow, we do? Yeah. So I'm going down the trail, and here's his sergeant coming up the trail, and he's got his arm severely wounded. And I stopped and talked to him, and I said, where are all these WIAs? And he said, down there. And I said, who are they? And he said, he named Murph. And I said, Gene Murphy? He said, I don't know, it's Murphy. So I just started hollering Gene's name, Murphy, Murphy. And when I got close enough to him, he hollered at me and said, Bo's over here. So then I found him, and I would have never seen him had he been unconscious, because he was over there in the jungle.
I think the first words I said to him, what the hell took you so long? And I knew he was probably more frightened maybe even than myself, because he rips 2 trees out, 3 inches thick with his bare hands to make me a stretcher. And when he was there, he kept saying, how are you doing? How are you doing? I said, I wouldn't talk much. He said, you're not going into shock. I said, no. I said, it just hurts. They were going to lift me on this poncho, and Demio was one that didn't like to see any blood. Lyle said, you lift him right in the middle, and Demio said, no, I don't think I can do it. And Lyle said, either you do it, I'm going to shoot you right here. And of course, I will. And they left him, and then they carried us. They carried me in probably about 400 meters. This was about 4:30 when we got hit. This was probably about 6:30 when the chopper come in. When they're hovering just on top of the trees, because we didn't have the LZ or the landing zone to put the bird in. And all of a sudden I can hear the NVA shooting the bird. Yeah, they're really shooting the hell out of him. I can hear the chopper pilot come back, one of them, hey, it's too damn hot, it's too hot, we're gonna abort the mission. And then I can hear him lift off. And I knew we'd be there all night then.
And of course, that was devastating news for us. Because the first thing, we know it's hot down here,
And then that night, he laid beside me the whole night, And of course, I begged for water, I was so thirsty, and he wouldn't give me any. He'd just give me I call it the cap of the canteen.
My training was give him a cap full. You can't give them very much because you're afraid if it's infected water that it could infect and make things worse. Anyway, this other guy was kind of screaming all night long. And had he got out that night, he would have been just fine. My understanding is. He was from Pennsylvania, Sioux. But he didn't. He died shortly before the chopper got there. Hour, maybe. So we laid there and everything, and then when the next morning came, I went down and told the captain that Gene's first one out. He said, okay. I went back to get him, because the chopper was coming, and got him down there and got him in there and got him up and got him gone, and that's all I could do. So I went back, and I was thirsty. I hadn't drank any water because I wasn't going to drink any water till I knew that Gene was okay. He had all the water he needed. And then I reached over and picked up my canteen to get that drink of water, because I'm the one that laid it back down there. I knew how much water was in that, and there was no water in that. You left yours down there in the jungle, remember?
Must have.
Yours wasn't made of plastic.
Yeah. Just like this, yeah.
That's a very identical thing.
Identical, yeah.
We each carried 2 of them, and then we
No,
had.
I carried 4 of them.
Well, I carried one of them 2 quart.
Yeah, the 2 quart, but they had the thinner rubber. This wouldn't, the vines wouldn't put a hole in this. It would in the 2 quart ones. The doctor came over and he had a chaplain with him, told me I wouldn't walk again. I mean, I was angry, but then I looked around and I knew I was probably very fortunate to be alive. You know, we seen guys shot up so bad that we thought they're not even going to make it to the chopper to get them out, and they lived. But we seen other guys. Jerry Warburton got shot through the knee, and an hour later he was dead. And then I had a buddy, Gary Grubbs. He was wounded February 6th. Well, I thought he was back to the world. Well, he came and seen me like the 3rd day in the VAC hospital. And I even said to him, Grubbs, what are you doing? He said, Sarge, I knew you'd need my tail back here, so he said, I volunteered to come back. And I said, well, why didn't you go home? He said, no, you guys need me. 25 days later, he got killed. You always think of those individuals, what could have he been? You know, would he have been a famous doctor, famous inventor? You know, he was I think, 19 years old.
After I put Gene Murphy on a chopper, I knew that I would not know whether he was alive or dead until I heard from home. And so immediately I wrote home to my folks and his folks and told them that Gene had been wounded. I got a letter back probably 2 weeks later that told me that Gene had made it. So that was the only way I knew. But I was sure glad to hear that Gene was alive.
They told me right away that I probably wouldn't have any kids. You know, we were blessed to have a daughter. Yeah, I guess I think I've been blessed. But I also say life is easy every day, because I look at that where, you know, every day I get up, I get clean clothes, a hot shower, I get to drink clean water, and that's where I always say, hey, life is easy. And then I always also add, if you know the Lord, it's going to be that much easier. And I guess I look back on different things, and yeah, I was very fortunate, you know, that my name isn't on the wall, you know, or even Lyle's name. I came back and went to school or to college in business administration, and I got really involved with the veterans, mainly the Paralyzed Veterans of America and the Disabled American Veterans. And you could say I got so involved with the veterans issues and stuff that I just went to work for the DAV, and that was way back in the 70s. You know, I mean, from raising dollars for them to lobbying as a lobbyist, a state newsletter and a chapter newsletter, working with the VA on different issues for veterans. So I ended up working for the last roughly 45 years with the Disabled American Veterans. I always say it's been a good run. We've done many things. We started a transportation program. We started that in 1984 right here in Sioux Falls. And then in 1987, our national DAV picked it up and ran with it throughout the nation. Where I was the national commander in 87, 88, I got to meet in the White House with President Reagan, but I've got to meet President Bush Sr., President Obama. I look at the freedoms we have, and, freedom is not free. Them veterans, many of them paid a price, and to me that price is for their lifetime. And that's at times Congress forgets that, we're a cost of war, and our war isn't over until we die. Now we've got these, I call these young whippersnappers coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan, and they've got seriously, injuries, and they're not being taken care of, we don't think, properly. DAV, may I help you? This is Murph. Well, we got the people here.
When you meet Gene, you want to be his friend forever, and anybody that he doesn't know is a friend that he doesn't know, but as soon as he just hasn't met him yet, and that's the way Gene is, and he's my brother.
Yeah, he saved me. And then, at times, how do you thank individuals that, and we've been like brothers. I was his best man at his wedding. I look at that and he's got 2 kids that are just, to me, super kids. But I did give him heck when his boy went in the Marine Corps. And now he's got actually a grandson that just went in.
I stop here a lot now, especially when I'm retired and I've got time. I stop here quite often because I know where he'll be. He'll be here.
Postcards is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Additional support provided by Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farms, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. On the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Alexandria, Minnesota, a year-round destination with hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for memorable vacations and events. More information at explorealex.com. The Lake Region Arts Council's Arts Calendar, an arts and cultural heritage funded digital calendar showcasing upcoming art events and opportunities for artists in West Central Minnesota. On the web at lrac4calendar.org. Playing today's new music plus your favorite hits. 96.7 Cram. Online at 967cram.com.